news story that appeared on 48 Hours on CBS, national news, on Saturday night at 9 o'clock. Now, the timing of that piece, I well anticipated since last year when they were filming it. And I knew that it was going to come either the Saturday before the early vote, or it was going to be the Saturday before Election Day, which is tomorrow. Now, as has been the situation for, I believe this is the third campaign where the Rene Garza case has surfaced in the middle of the campaign, I feel compelled, almost 10 years to the day from the grand jury deliberation back in 2004, to ask you to come here and review the amount of work that was done by a grand jury back in 2004. I'm not here to criticize anybody. I'm not here to injure anybody further. I know that the family of Rene Garza suffers through today. I know that some want closure. I know that some have already are at peace with what happened. And I know that there's a lot of national attention on this case because of the fact that this case could be a made-for-movie for a TV movie or a regular movie because of the situation that confronted this county back in 1960. Now, I know that there's a lot of misinformed citizens in our county, in our state, and maybe some nationally, who believe that I made the decision not to prosecute the case. That is not so. This case started in the disappearance of Rene Garza back in, I believe, April 1960 when I was 15 years old. And I'm a member of the Sacred Heart Parish here in was a member of the Sacred Heart Parish here in Edinburgh, where there was an attack earlier than Rene Garza, where Father Fight was the suspect of an attempted rape at Sacred Heart, which is situated between here, the courthouse in the center of Edinburgh, and my home, which is about 4 blocks away from Sacred Heart Church. And as a parishioner there, when I was 15, and my mom, who was a faithful attendee of the masses and would take us, we were all concerned about our safety back in 1960 when that attack was made at Sacred Heart. And after that development, and then later on the disappearance of Rene Garza and McAllen, we were all concerned, and we all read the newspapers. I read the newspapers because I was a very avid reader of the McAllen Monitor and the Edinburgh Daily Review, which were carrying the stories. And at that time, as a 15-year-old, I was, I believe, in junior high or 8th grade. In junior high, I formed my opinion that as to who the suspect was because he was mentioned in the newspaper accounts. And I was angry about it. Now, some 40 years later, as a district attorney, having had several district attorneys prior to my election in 1982, having had the authority of the DA's office, those DAs passed on the opportunity to open up the case or to ask a reinvestigation. And especially the individual that was holding the office back then, Mr. Bob Lattimore, he had access to all the investigation. He had access to all the police reports. He had access to all the affidavits of witnesses who saw the victim in and around the church on that that dreaded day, that tragic day. And he saw fit not to prosecute any and all suspects that he thought would have been targeted of that investigation. Now, many years later, after a couple of investigations by the Texas Rangers and the gathering of information, then I was practically compelled to have a grand jury look at the case, and they did. Because I had reviewed some of the evidence in the case, and I believed that the case was too weak to prosecute 44 years later, I turned over the case to my first assistant. Now, the national news media has slanted their presentations like if I handled the investigation. And I don't mind that they do that. Of course, that is inaccurate. What is before you is all the evidence and all the exhibits and all the reports and all the tape recordings and all the binders that were looked at by the grand jury. They took 14 days, I believe started March the 10th of 2004 through June. They spent 76 hours reviewing each and every thing that was pertinent to the investigation, including all these tape recordings of recorded conversations, and even, I believe, some VHS tape recordings of something had appeared in the McAllen local net of the police department in the city. And after reviewing all this information, that grand jury decided not to charge John Fight for the murder of Irene Garza. Now, a lot of people believe that it was my decision. It was not my decision. Now, could I have handled the press better before the cases were brought over to me? Yes, I could have. And I know that if I could take one phrase back, I would. But people still don't realize, and I try to tell them that when I received the small investigation that appeared, which is not what you see here, at that time, from the affidavits that I read, I didn't believe that this case would ever be solved or could ever be prosecuted. And that's when I made that decision. I mean, the statement of the case will go to court when pigs fly. Of course, it was the quality of the investigation that I said. It wasn't intended to be callous toward the victims. Whether people realize it or not or don't believe it, I believe Linda de la Viña lived 1 block away from my mom's house, from our home. And they were friends. Those families used to buy tortillas from my mom's little tortilla factory. They were friends. A lot of them are still friends of mine. The De La Viña family have been supporters of mine from the very beginning because of the personal friendships that my mom and my dad had with the older De La Viñas. One of the De La Viñas was my attempt at 3rd grade when I was sent back to 2nd grade because I hadn't spent enough days in school. So those relationships have existed for years. So for anybody to say that I'm callous reference to Irene Garza is being unfair and unkind. Now, when I was 15, I wanted to hang somebody, even though I had no authority to hang anybody. And the law did not, it might have allowed hanging back then. But I felt whoever had taken her life, the beauty queen from McAllen, I felt deserved the death penalty even without a trial. Even though I was not knowledgeable of the law or whatever, but I just felt like if a vigilante group, like in the TV shows, that if they could do that, I was all for it. Of course, now as a prosecutor with the oath of making sure that we follow the law, the Code of Criminal Procedure, I cannot believe in that because we have now procedure, we have statutes, we have laws, and that's what I've done for the last 31 years and 33 years in the DA's office. Now, because of the because of the ruling of the Attorney General's office, I would have hoped to show you documentary evidence and disclose it to you. I wish that you would hear some of the tape recordings on some of the things that have filtered out into the media, where the recordings speak for themselves. Under the Code of Criminal Procedure, the grand jury foreman and myself have the authority to compel witnesses before a grand jury in an investigation. Now, what we did here was a grand jury investigation, not a law enforcement like the one we did for Westlaco. They received the information from the police department, and they analyzed the evidence, and they conducted further investigation and had witnesses that appeared before them. Now, the reason that we required the case to come to our office is because of a long-standing policy that I've had in the past, that if the individual is out of state, I believe that we should review the cases here before we go out and get somebody from out of state and then find out that there's not enough evidence to convict an individual, or that somebody changes testimony, and then we'll have to dismiss the charges. So we look at the case. If the indictment is returned, then we go to our governor to go to wherever the suspect state's governor, wherever the suspect is located, and we ask that governor to send that individual back to our county to be prosecuted. That was the only reason that I stopped the McAllen Police Department, the Rangers, from issuing an arrest warrant for what they believed the suspect was, and that they believed that they had evidence to authorize that. It was not to be an obstacle, as it has been alleged. It was to follow our procedure that if we were going to be looking at a capital murder case, that as prosecutors we were duty-bound to review the quality of the information, and also to bring it before a grand jury. And that's the procedure that have followed for as far as I remember. Now, this case required extensive review by 12 citizens that were selected by a district judge through a computer random selection process. They were not handpicked like in some other grand juries where the judge with some of his friends or her friends or acquaintances can bring in a select friends of the court to nominate now up to 40 people. The grand jury that was selected here, we requested a computer randomly selected grand jury, so nobody would accuse that somebody was packing the grand jury to no bill or to indict any suspect on the Rene Garza case. That was what I attempted to do by asking a district judge, I believe it was Rene Guerra, to bring in a randomly selected computer grand jury. And that was done, and I still believe, that the decision of that grand jury was the right decision. And I know that it hurts the family, and I feel for the family. And now some family members may be a little more outspoken than others. But the reality of the situation is that in our office, and the integrity of this office and the oath that I've taken, I live with it every day, and I have to face a mirror every day about doing the right thing. And if excuse me, this battery is going dead, so we do that every day as prosecutors. I ask my people, we have to do the right thing. The easy decision is to be doing the popular decision, but oftentimes the popular decision has destroyed the prosecutors because they gave in to public pressure. And if I need to point somebody that's been in the limelight, look at what happened in North Carolina, where the prosecutor lost his job because he went after an athletic team on a sexual assault. He was blinded by the publicity. He was blinded by the situation. The Morton case that now compels us to discover all our cases, the death penalty case out of Georgetown. Those are the situations that I hope will never confront Hidalgo County, whether it be me as a prosecutor or somebody else in the future. Now I'm open to questions.
I guess basically, sorry, could I ask it? This sounds like it wasn't necessarily translated, I guess, the same way through the show 48 Hours. What is it? So do you think they left things out, or are you able to explain things better than that?
When you have, I think they in the program they said that they had the Texas Monthly editor or a writer for the Texas Monthly that slammed me in an early article as their consultant. When I saw that, I knew that 48 Hours was going to give me some airtime. But because of the secrecy of this investigation, that's still an active investigation, there was no way that I could show them with actual testimony or tape-recorded interviews as to what were the problems with the case. Now, when you have a ranger talking to a witness and then having that witness call the suspect, that ranger has made the witness a law enforcement officer. He doesn't realize it. But if he had a statement where he said, yes, I killed Rene Garza, at the insistence of a ranger for a witness to call the person, he's made him a law enforcement officer. In that case, oftentimes it's going to be suppressed. Just the sharing of the information of the investigation to law enforcement. If you look at the articles on the internet, you have the Dallas Morning News almost spreading out the investigation. I did not have the investigation around that time that I would have leaked it to the Dallas Morning News. Law enforcement officials, rightfully or wrongfully, leaked out a lot of information. Now, we had some wonderful investigators that did their job. I know that McAllen Police Department, the early investigators, tried to do their best. There was something unusual in the early situations that I cannot discuss, where an individual was made a special investigator without any training. That to me was mind-boggling. And then, of course, you had some good Texas Rangers. Then you had a couple that maybe didn't have the investigation training for this kind of case to conduct, and I believe they made mistakes, some serious mistakes. When you talk to witnesses, you can't give them the information. You need to ask them the information. You can't say, this looks like my case and what have you, and then say, a jury's going to believe that you didn't feed the information to the juror, to the witness. Those are situations that I have to confront as a prosecutor all the time. Not me personally, but my other 40-some-odd lawyers that are in the courts every day. When you give the information to witnesses and then later on they appear, and especially if you tape record it, they're not going to make very good witnesses. And the investigators are going to suffer the embarrassment along with my prosecutor if they lose the case. You had Texas Rangers, you had Laboratory. The Hidalgo County Sheriff's Office was not an investigative agency in the case, a lead investigative agency. He was a McAllen Police Department. Now I know in the shows, a lot is said about Sheriff's Office personnel. To my knowledge, this investigation was done by Texas Rangers early on with FBI and the McAllen Police Department. Now later on, I'm sure that everybody collaborated and tried to solve the case, just like any cold case unit would. Other questions?
So you said that it's against your policy to bring someone in from out of state if you don't have an airtight case or you don't have a really good case. Do you think in this case, even without indicting him, you could have called him to testify just to prove to the public that you were doing everything you could?
One, the procedure says that any defendant has the right to remain silent.
Right,
but hold on. If I or the four person the grand jury issues a process to fight or anybody else out of state, it's served out of state. They're going to come before the grand jury here, and they're going to say, you are our target. These are your rights. I haven't seen a defendant come in here in my 33 years as an assistant DA and elected DA that has ever come before a grand jury body like the ones that we have in Hidalgo County and admitted they committed a crime. In fact, the lawyers come up real quick and they say, look, do we go in there and plead the Fifth Amendment to every question, or do you just let us go and not bother with the procedure because my client's not going to answer one question? Now, I don't see John Fight from Arizona coming all the way over here when he slammed the door on the national news media, coming over here and saying, okay, I'm ready to tell you and answer any questions that you want. I don't believe so. Yes, ma'am.
I know, well, that may also be true. I guess it's kind of similar as to what Jake was asking. But as the prosecution, do you feel like just reaching out, even if you may have, brushed everyone off, said, hey, I plead the fifth, do you think it would have been worth a shot? I know some people, we had a lot of comments, people saying, hey, why not try?
No, because Hidalgo County would have had to pay the bill to fly him down here at about a couple of $1,000s worth. And then if he didn't bring in a lawyer, hire a lawyer, we would have to appoint a lawyer for him. Probably he would have asked for a lawyer. It would have been additional expense to the county for I refuse to answer any and all questions. I mean, there's some, you can't knock yourself against the wall all the time without realizing that you're not going to knock the wall down. And as a prosecutor, not only myself, but the people that work with the grand jury, like my other prosecutors, Murray Moore and Paul Tarlow and Mr. Vasquez, and back then Jane Alonso, the ones that were assigned to the grand jury unit. It's useless to try to bring in a defendant unless you want that defendant on a co-conspirator that's more important for the prosecution than the lesser individual accused of a crime and a conspiracy. Individual crimes, especially murders and kidnappings and that kind of stuff, I haven't seen anybody come over and own up to their violation, crime. Yes, sir.
Speaking to the De La Viña family, they also expressed what they were saying, why weren't the priests brought over to the jury and have them say or give their testimony in person rather than recording sort of papers, and that she claims that at one point, even before it was sent to a jury, that you had pointed at her saying that they would never get an indictment.
Well, there's a lot of things that can be said in the heat of the moment, okay? Now, when somebody questions your integrity, questions your faith to the law and your oath, sometimes people get hot under the collar. It is hard to tell a layman or a laywoman or a victim's family that you cannot prosecute a case based on the evidence that we have in court, even after indictment, much less before indictment, for them to understand. I don't know of a victim's family that doesn't want to be in court to look at somebody who's being tried, even though he may be the wrong person, scientifically, okay, through DNA and what have you. And so in those kind of situations, when the emotion has been simmering for many years, and then you think that you see something, a gleam of light that might lead to the prosecution of an individual, I know those emotions are going to erupt, where you demand that somebody be held accountable. But the problem here, before you get there, is that you have to look at and examine what procedure and what the law enforcement community did. And in this case, when you have Father O'Brien being tape recorded for about 4 hours, and then you have countless other hours for Tashney, the foreman of the grand jury, together with the rest, they decided that they did not want to hear any further testimony after 14 weeks and 76 hours of testimony. I don't know that Father O'Brien or Tashney or any other priest could have come in here and enlightened and given any new evidence that hadn't been gathered by the Rangers and McAllen PD, efficiently, or maybe with mistakes. I don't know that they could have corrected any earlier mistakes that may have come into the case. I know that Chief Rodriguez is upset. He said he wanted a prosecutor. Well, you just don't go hunting for a prosecutor. You have to request that somebody look at your evidence before an indictment is returned. You can't demand an indictment as a police officer just to have an outcome that you believe should be done or should be the outcome. I might point out that recently when in the sheriff's son's case, I mean, anybody who looked at a video would have realized that you couldn't file a charge just like that. Now, when you're looking at capital murder with subject to the death penalty, that case is going to be going over with a fine-tooth comb, especially if you before indictment, not after indictment, before indictment. And that's what we try to do, and that's always been my policy. Now, some cases are very easy. You have a confession on a killing of somebody and kidnapping; those are easy cases. No, it's the hard cases, the circumstantial evidence cases. Now, you still can't say that Father O'Brien really was a good witness, because a lot of you don't know the history of Father O'Brien. and especially later on when he was up in years. As little as 2002, I believe, he was on the show in McAllen where he said he knew nothing about the case. But then a little later, I believe he was in Brownsville and what have you, and then retired to San Antonio. He said some other things, but then he had failing health. And he had other problems that I don't want to mention. But I know it existed. Yes, ma'am.
I know you had mentioned that, I guess 48 Hours had sort of misconstrued that, you know, the grand jury, it was no bills, but this was something that you may have played a part in. You said, hey, you delegated it to, you know, some of your associates. Is that something that you stand by, that they did everything that they could to, you know, present all the facts of it?
I certify it. I told him, you handled the case. And I'm going to tell you why. Back in 78, I was given not a similar case, but a case that was conducted by a court of inquiry on federal programs. And I told my assistants what I received back then from my boss, the DA. He said, you take this and make sure that what you do is what the state interest demands. And that case was a political case against some people that were in charge of federal programs, where we, the prosecutors, believed that the court of inquiry had not enough evidence to arrest people who had been arrested. And I remember that lesson well, and I told my assistant, Homer Vasquez and Jane Alonso, you are the DAs for this case. You will prosecute this case to the best of your ability, and if indictment returns, you're going to go into the courtroom with this case, because you will be the DA. Because I don't believe that I could have, in my opinions that I had aired earlier, would have been a person to go into the courtroom with this kind of case, and then if I lost it, I would say, no, Rene didn't try hard enough. I would have been criticized. Criticized if you do, and criticized if you don't.
And I guess another question as far as, because I know you had mentioned a little bit about 48 Hours and some of the things that were said.
CNN also. CNN was more biased than 48 Hours.
And so that's what I wanted to ask you. When you saw the segment Saturday, what were your initial thoughts? And I know that you were holding this conference today. Do you feel like it's almost too late because it's so close to elections? And
I'm not doing this for the election. I'm doing this for the sake of the citizens of the county, the people that still don't know about grand jury and what we do. It's about the integrity of this office. The belief that what we receive here, we're going to do the best we can with what is brought to us. And if it's not brought to us in well enough, and if we can investigate through a grand jury, we can help assist the law enforcement community in the investigation. And that's what we do. If some people don't cooperate with a police agency or the sheriff, we can subpoena them and compel them to testify with the power of the grand jury. Not my power, but the power of the grand jury. And we have done that a couple of times. Yes, sir?
Did you say again the names of the attorneys who worked the case?
Homer Vasquez and Jane Alonso. Jane has retired, and I believe she's in Pittsburgh? No. Lockhart, I'm sorry. That's way out of, okay, Lockhart.
And Homer Vasquez?
Homer Vasquez. He's still my first assistant. And we hope he will continue. Yes, sir.
I know that you said you didn't want to keep or make this political at all, but I know for example, the De La Viña are very open about their support of your opponent and ask him or wish for him to do something with this case if they
gets
win,
elected,
or if he gets elected. If he doesn't and you remain in your position, what's the future of this case? Will it remain as it is?
It should be an active case unless the evidence breaks where you have another witness. You know, Tashney, when he came to Texas, he was looking for a body in San Antonio. By the time that he finished with all the interviews and everything else, I think there's a news report where he said that he knew the name of as Irene. He never had that knowledge when he made the first contacts in San Antonio of even the name of the victim, even the first name or the last name. And so when you have that out there in the media, and then you have that in tape recordings, incredible. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm just wondering, because I know the state carries the burden of proof. And so I know as far as credibility of witnesses, I'm just wondering if it's one of those situations where you try to bring as much as you can to the table and wait for the defense to discredit you, or is it one of those things where you want to be sure before you go into court that these people are credible witnesses?
The grand jury, by the oath given to the judge, has to decide whether there's enough evidence to prosecute somebody on the roads. And if you look at the oath, and we'll be happy to provide, it says that they will not present somebody out of hatred or prevent somebody out because of love or affection. Okay? It was their oaths, and after their review of this amount of evidence that you see in the case, that they decided that they were not going to accuse John Fight. And so they returned a no bill or not an accusation at the time, which was back in 2004.
Well, I think I meant as far as not bringing, O'Brien or Tashin to the grand jury. I was just wondering as far as, because I know you said that, they may not be credible witnesses, but typically, or at least from my understanding, which, maybe I don't know, sitting in court, usually the defense is the one who tries to poke holes into
Right.
the witnesses' statements.
Mhm.
But it seems, maybe from other people's perception that without these people even going up, the defense didn't have to bother to do that because the prosecution was making the case for the defense.
We were not making a case for the defense, but because this is a capital murder case involving an extradition and tremendous other situations, especially financial, that we felt that a grand jury should look at this because they ultimately had to decide whether they were going to prosecute or not. Authorize the prosecution or not. Yes, sir.
You said this was the third time that it's been brought up in a campaign. You also said that this conference wasn't about a campaign. But why are you talking about it now and not before?
Well, if you look at the 48 hours, they got political in their story. It was an ordinary documentary. In the last shot, I believe, of the presentation, they said the election is Tuesday, and so they calculated what they were doing. The CNN story was interviewed early last year, and they said they told me that they were shooting to present the CNN article on Holy Week because they wanted to shoot to present it nationally on Holy Week. And then the tornadoes happened in Oklahoma, and Gary Tugman called me because I called him and said, "Hey, I'm waiting for the story you said you were gonna air on Holy Week." And he told me because of the tornadoes in Oklahoma and the devastation in the Midwest, we looked at it also as a slam against the Catholic Church, and we felt like we were gonna get negative publicity if we went and presented the Rene Guerra case in the middle of Easter weekend. So they also were looking at what they were doing because they knew they were going to slam me and that they were going to slam the church. Now, there's always been an accusation that the church hit the priest from the law enforcement. Ed Bradley from 60 Minutes came over a few years ago before his unfortunate death. He did an interview. It was going to be a part of 60 Minutes. And his take was that the OMI and the orders where these priests belonged to, that they had protected the priests from the investigation. And they didn't present it because they received a letter from a lawyer who said, if you air this and you're slanderous and libelous, we're going to sue you because that's not the truth. And I told them, and I will tell everybody, Father Fight was made available for 3 or 4 lie detector tests here and in Chicago. He was made available through a lawyer that was gotten for him by some friends. Mr. Rafael Flores, he gave statements.
Didn't he flunk the lie detector though?
Well, the opinion of the examiner was that he flunked the lie detector, but there was another report that I read a long time ago that said that they couldn't tell because there was some specifics into what he was doing that they couldn't actually do it. I know it's been aired that he flunked the lie detector. Back then and now, today, you still can admit lie detector test as evidence in a courtroom, in a court of law. So it's useless to, the lie detector is utilized by law enforcement to almost break down an individual into confessing. I know of one case that I tried where the individual took a lie detector and passed it. He was a security guard at Pan American. He passed the test. Later on, his wife turned him in because he spent the money on a girlfriend. That was the best lie detector that we had there. And he got convicted for taking registration monies at Pan American. I believe it was about $5,000. Yes, ma'am.
So lie detector tests are not admissible evidence in court?
No, ma'am. They're not. And when they are publicized in the media, a lot of people are going to convict the individual, and even though he might be innocent.
And also, I guess, because I know we've been kind of touching on the different things throughout this segment that aired on Saturday, but could you kind of, I'm assuming you were watching it just like most people here in the Valley.
I was compelled to watch it personally.
So while you were sitting there, because I know there was a lot of shots that were kind of taken at you, what was going through your mind, and how did you feel sitting watching the segment?
Well, when this is not the first time they've done it. CNN and CBS and other people. The Texas Monthly. They sent me a photographer that supposedly was a photographer, Sandra Bullock, to take pictures of me, where I drink at the time where I was having breakfast and drinking coffee with my friends. And they had me pose all over the place. Well, go look at the Texas Monthly article that wasn't there to present a fair evaluation of the Rene Guerra case. They slammed me. When CNN, Gary Tuckman came in several years ago, he reminded me he had been here before. And then this last one, he says, the first one I was gentle to you, but this next one I was going to be even harsher until you said that you would have prosecuted back in '62. So when you have that kind of a statement being given to you by the media, but you know that they're tunnel vision because they only have one thing in mind for the documentary. I don't know of any documentary that is slanted against any individual that is going to be favorable to the person that's being attacked. I haven't seen that many. Maybe the National Geographic on animals and what have you, but when it comes to human beings, most of the time, individuals that are subject of a documentary are crucified.
So I know you kind of remain tough. I know it must have been hard to listen through all that, but as far as personally, was it difficult having to listen through, some of the stuff that was being said?
No, it wasn't. It's not difficult. It was disappointing because when you're led to believe that you're a professional national network, and I might remind everybody about what happened with Dan Rather when he accused President Bush that caused him to lose his job. When a national network fixes on an outcome, and they send reporters and investigators and producers to fit the outcome, to fit their show, I think a lot of times they're going to do a miscarriage of justice to the people that are being the subject of the documentary or the investigation. That's what's disappointing. People say that we're not professional. Well, I have 59 professionals that are taking the oath to be professional lawyers and ethical lawyers that represent the state here. Of course, we get attacked. People file grievances because we may not answer the question the way they want to, or they may make false allegations, and we're subjected to grievances with the state bar. I know I have been a victim of many of those, even though I had nothing to do with whatever they were saying. Now, I expected the same standards within media, national media, but if they want to sell airtime, I don't think they want to air too many nice stories, because then people start watching. So some of the stories have to be a little scandalous and a little directed to kind of rile up the audience and the people to see it and maybe the national companies to buy more advertising. That's the unfortunate thing about some of these shows.
So what's the bottom line? What can you do to fix it, or can you do anything? What are you gonna do?
There's nothing we can do to fix the outcome of the Rene Guerra case right now, unless we have some other evidence that may come to light that will make the case not only indictable but prosecutable. And of course, I'm always hoping. That's why I don't disclose everything to you, because if I disclose everything to you, I violated the open record, the confidentiality of investigations that are still pending. Murder cases don't have a statute of limitations. As you recall, what happened in the South, the church bombings and all those are prosecuted many years later. And the case that we had in Westlaco 25 years later with the DNA. So this case is still an active case. There's still a couple of individuals that were at that church on that fateful day when Irene disappeared. Other questions?
Oh. Well, I had one question. I know you had mentioned that you yourself is, a 15-year-old boy.
15.
Was over at Sacred Heart Church. Did you at any point ever cross paths with Priest Fight?
No, he was a visiting priest, and the only one that I remember there was a priest that was very scolding, and another priest that was Macamian priest, Charles Moran, that's mentioned in the investigation, was talked to on the Guerra case. There was a friend of mine, became a friend of mine after I went to Pan American. He was the priest for I believe, the church affiliated fraternity at Pan American. Anything else?
You plan to do this in Spanish?
Yes, I'll be happy to do that for you.
Through all the questions, all the same questions.
Yeah, no problem. Anybody who needs a package on the statutes and what have you is.
Thank you.
Thank you.